BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And just a quick reminder, every Monday is Zodiac Mondays, Wednesday is an Ask Me Anything, that's an AMA, so please drop your questions below for things that you would like discussed here on the show, and Friday is an Anything Goes, any subject is fair game, mostly talking about true crime, serial killers, the Zodiac Killer, but any subject is welcome. Alright, so please share some ideas in the comment section about what you would like to hear about on this channel, and let's get started. Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to this special weekend presentation. Today we're going back to 1981 to revisit the murder of Joan Webster, and this episode will be done in a different format. I regularly correspond with Eve Carson, who is the sister-in-law of Joan Webster and the author of the book Mommy's a Mole, which talks about her theories and her take on the case. There's also a book out called The Paradiso Files by Tim Burke, who was the prosecutor in a case that was connected to the murder of Joan Webster. Joan's death is heavily linked to the 1979 murder of Marie Iannuzzi, and the person who was convicted for Marie's murder is the authorities' prime suspect in Joan Webster's murder. His name is Leonard Paradiso, and that is also the title of Tim Burke's book, The Paradiso Files. In this episode, we're going to go through a presentation that Eve Carson has made and provided me with, talking about her responses to Tim Burke's theory in the Paradiso Files, also looking at possible intentional fabrications that have been put forward by the authorities to vilify Leonard Paradiso for Joan Webster's murder back in 1981. Then I will provide some responses, as well as looking at some of the alternatives, and then we will share some correspondences that I've done with Eve Carson, trying to clear the air. I would ask that everybody approach this with an open mind, and if there's something that you hear in this presentation that doesn't quite make sense to you, you can put that in the comments section as well. Challenge any of the ideas. Say something that comes to mind. What do you think happened to Joan Webster? What do you think happened to Marie Iannuzzi? Is there going to be a particular side of any of the presentations that you think is more compelling? And then we will share everything at the end. Okay, but the first thing that you're looking at now is Tim Burke, the prosecutor, who's holding a copy of his book, The Paradiso Files, and let's look at some of the claims in the book. Eve Carson wanted to point out that Burke's case against Paradiso started with a false assertion, and this segment of the Paradiso Files states that in early March of 1982, the first witness was called before the Suffolk County Grand Jury in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus John Doe, the investigation into the murder of Marie Barbara Iannuzzi. The inquiry was held in a solemn, windowless room with 23 dark blue leather chairs facing the prosecutor's table and the adjacent witness stand. Okay, so to provide a little bit of background about Leonard Paradiso's connections to these murders, Marie Iannuzzi was murdered in 1979, as we said. She was found strangled with a scarf that had been tied in a double knot in a marshy area near Lynn, Massachusetts. And Joan Webster was murdered in 1981. Her remains were not discovered until 1990. These two crimes were committed in a very different way. Joan Webster was killed with blunt force trauma. However, because her remains were discovered as much as 8.5, nearly 9 years later, other possible methods of execution were not able to be determined. Like, another cause of death could not have been discovered by the medical examiners. So, going on to the next slide here, the Commonwealth then switched to a John Doe in their presentation. They said the testimony in the March 5th, 1982, Marie Iannuzzi grand jury implicated Marie's boyfriend, David Doyle. The March 5th, 1982, grand jury versus the Commonwealth of Leonard Paradiso. And Tim Burke changed the target to John Doe on April 5th of 1982. Eve Carson still stands to this day that David Doyle should be the prime suspect for the murder of Marie Iannuzzi. Here's an interesting point, though. There is a definitive connection between Leonard Paradiso and Marie Iannuzzi, and he was with her on the night that she was last seen alive. However, he has no verifiable connection to Joan Webster that I can think of. Joan Webster disappeared in Boston, Massachusetts after leaving Logan Airport, and the authorities provided this explanation that they thought Leonard Paradiso was operating an illegal taxi and he gave Joan Webster a ride. But, I mean, well, you'll have to weigh out what you think with each side for yourself. Carmen Tomorrow visited Paradiso at the Charles Street Jail on August 1st, 1982. He accused Leonard Paradiso of murdering Joan Webster on his boat and dumping her body overboard. So he's picking her up at Logan Airport in Boston, Massachusetts, offering her a ride. Joan Webster is actually about to get into a different taxi. Then this guy comes over, some guy with a very disheveled beard and messy hair, wearing a pair of glasses, and he says something to Joan Webster, convinces her to get into his car, and then whatever happened between him and Joan Webster, only he knows, if he is still alive. Joan Webster was driven to a place perhaps somewhat close to Logan Airport, actually. Definitely not like an enormous amount of miles away, but she was not found on a boat. She wasn't found in the water. Anything that you're going to hear about this, she was murdered on a boat and thrown overboard. As we've already said, Joan Webster was found in 1990. Her remains were buried in the ground nearly 30 miles inland. Okay, on to the next slide. Tim Burke claims he received a letter from Robert Bond on the 5th of January 1983 detailing Marie Iannuzzi and Joan Webster's murders. Okay, Robert Bond is a jailhouse informant, and this is going to be very important in Eve's presentation here. So, what is the significance of this? The significance is the date that this guy, Tim Burke, he was the prosecutor for Leonard Paradiso, trying to convict him of the murder of Marie Iannuzzi. Tim Burke believes that Paradiso committed the Joan Webster murder, but he was not convicted for that one. They attributed it to him. But look at this date here, January 5th, 1983, and I'll just read this thing that's highlighted here in green. The letter detailed information that wasn't publicly known about either woman's case. There's a reason why she has written the word false here. If we go on to this one, on the next slide, you can see that the Massachusetts State Police interviewed Robert Bond on January 14th, 1983. The letter that he's talking about had not arrived. It was mailed on January 10th, 1983, and you even saw the last date was January 5th, so Eve Carson has gone back and she has said that the letter wasn't even in the mail at the time. On the 5th of January 1983, the authorities had nothing. They did not have this letter at all that said anything. It hadn't even been mailed yet. And when I read this for the first time, I was like, all right, I can kind of see where you're going, but so what? What's the big deal? What if they just obtained it later? I mean, you see how it's mailed on January 10th. Well, what if it arrived on January 13th and then Robert Bond is interviewed on January 14th? Is this just making a mountain out of a molehill? That was my first instinct, and you might even be wondering that for yourself. But we're going to see that that letter is going to be coming up later on. On to the next slide here. There's a state trooper named Andrew Palumbo who filed a sworn warrant under Marie Iannuzzi's case on the 25th of April 1983. To search a home under the pains and penalties of perjury. And this states that on January 5th, 1983, Tim Burke received a letter from Robert Bond, an inmate at the Charles Street Jail. We now know that that is not true, that is something that was also fabricated. Bond said that he had information about the murder of Marie Iannuzzi and the disappearance of the Joan Webster that led to her murder, although they didn't know that Joan Webster had been murdered at the time. Her remains weren't discovered until years later. So throughout all of those years, Joan was still listed as a missing person, and some of the other things that I've been reading about the case over the past few weeks is that Joan Webster's disappearance really took the media by storm. It was a tabloid sensation in the Massachusetts area, and even goes on to be featured in Gareth Penn's book, Time 17, talking about the story of the Zodiac Killer in California and Massachusetts. Gareth Penn believed that Joan Webster fell victim to the Zodiac Killer. Now the letter, Burke arranged to have Bond meet with him, representatives of the state police, at the Suffolk County Courthouse. All right, we still need to pay attention to these dates because this is all going to come back. On or about January 14th, 1983, the meeting took place at the courthouse. At that time, Bond said in substance that one Leonard Paradiso was then also an inmate at Charles Street Jail, had told him at the jail that he, Paradiso, had killed Maria Iannuzzi and was responsible for the disappearance of Joan Webster. Bond said that Paradiso told him that Paradiso had taken Miss Webster from the airport to his boat at Pier 7 on Northern Avenue, South Boston, had sexual intercourse with her, beaten her with a whiskey bottle, and then taken her way out and dumped her in the ocean, and thereafter brought his boat back and sabotaged it and sank it. They're going to say a lot of things about Leonard Paradiso, that he was a hitman for the mob, or even the subtitle of Tim Burke's book is, he is Boston's unknown serial killer, and that's one thing that I thought also didn't quite make sense about the story. They're putting forward this angle that this guy has murdered people, dumped their bodies at sea regularly, and then all of a sudden after the Webster murder he decided to sink his boat out of fear of getting caught. Well, if he did this thing regularly, why is he afraid about being caught only this one time? Or also, if he murdered Maria Iannuzzi, and why would he dump her body in a marshy area when his MO, his method of going about this is to dump the bodies at sea? These are some other giant red flags that I find. Just somebody who is sitting back and trying to learn about these things in the true crime world. This is the boat theory. You can see this on the left-hand side, tomorrow's boat theory. I mean, the instant red flag with this one is, okay, of course she wasn't buried at sea. Her remains were found on land. Is it possible that whoever did this or concocted this boat theory had good intentions? I mean, you be the judge. Or do you think that this is an intentional fabrication by the authorities because they believe the guy was guilty, they thought that he had something to do with it, and they simply just wanted to get him convicted, and they didn't really care about the evidence? They're like, let's just make this thing work. But you can see on the left side here, Palumbo makes the same claims as Tomorrow in his warrants. Palumbo files other search warrants with the same false justification, September 28th, 1983, and the search warrant for Paradiso's boat, the Malafemina. I don't speak Italian, being very clear about that, but I think Malafemina means evil woman. I saw that in some of the other pieces of writing about this. And the search warrant for the surgical removal of a splinter from Paradiso's finger. The thing that we talk about regularly on this channel in these episodes on the murder of Joan Webster relate to the fact that this boat didn't even exist at the time. Joan Webster disappeared in November of 1981. She was traveling because of Thanksgiving break. Leonard Paradiso sank his boat in the summer of 1981, and it's highly likely that he sank it by breaking the rudder so it would sink intentionally. It was an insurance fraud issue. It had been underwater for nearly 5 months. Maybe this day will come up later, but the thing that stands out in my mind is the 26th of July, 1981, when Leonard Paradiso sank the boat and Joan Webster went missing. On the 28th of November, the boat was already underwater at the time, so this is also a hard theory to push. But, I mean, the authorities would always have a fall plan. Like, their simple response to Joan's remains being found on land is that, all right, well, it wasn't on the boat, it was in the taxi, but I don't want to get into those counter-arguments at the time. We'll save that for the end. The next slide says, Carmen Tomorrow confirmed. Previous meetings with Bond on January 14th, 1983. Tomorrow met with Bond on January 10th, the same day that Bond mailed his letter to Tim Burke. Bond confirmed reward money. Oh, about reward money, they were trying to give him an enticement that if he provided some information that he could collect a reward, but Robert Bond never received this reward, the reward money. I believe it was $50,000. Yeah, it says it right here. You said the other day $50,000 if he provided information that would lead to solving the Joan Webster case, but Robert Bond did not get any money from that. But this also goes to show you that the detectives who are supposedly working with the prosecutor, Tim Burke, had very clear knowledge that there was no letter mailed on January 5th, on January 5th, they did not have possession of any letter. And then it says here that during Bond's testimony on July 16th of 1984, I had discussions with the state police on the 10th of January. There was never a letter on July 5th, or if there was any letter on January 5th, excuse me, I want to be very clear about that. If there ever was any letter on January 5th, it would have been either a fabrication or it did not come from Robert Bond. Carmen tomorrow makes arrangements to pick up Robert Bond's letter for Robert Bond's family during an interview with MSP on January 14th of 1983. And he wanted to pick up the letter from the family on January 14th of 1983. So you can also find out that these people are being in charge of the correspondences, and that whatever happens with the material is up to them. The false report submitted to the federal authorities, and I want to read this thing off here that says that for information, Bureau, Boston Division, recently contacted by a Massachusetts state prison inmate who claimed to have information relative to the disappearance of a victim and related homicide. Source identified Leonard J. Paradiso as a person responsible for the murder of victim Maria Iannuzzi, whose body was discovered in 1978, although I believe she was discovered in 79. Suffolk County District Attorney's Office and Boston, Massachusetts State Police were provided information from the source that they are conducting the Iannuzzi and Webster investigations. And this other one here that is on the right side, it says that it stated that Webster was taken by boat into the Boston harbor where she was killed and the body was dumped into the harbor. So they're really pushing this boat theory, which, it's blatantly false. And it didn't resurface until years later. Joan's remains did not surface until years later, and that gave them all kinds of time. They could make up any story they wanted about the cause of death, as well as how Joan was disposed of, but she simply was not dumped in sea or anywhere in the Boston harbor. Now, this next slide here is a quotation that I obtained from Tim Burke. I contacted him and asked him if he wanted to be interviewed about this for Black Box Online Radio, to be a featured guest on the show to talk about the murder of Joan Webster, Leonard Paradiso, his book, The Paradiso Files, the murder of Maria Iannuzzi, all of that. And he declined my request for an interview, so I asked him if he could give a comment about the murders of Maria Iannuzzi and Joan Webster, and he provided me with this here, which I then sent to Eve Carson, and she incorporated into her presentation. Leonard Paradiso openly bragged about killing both Maria Iannuzzi and Joan Webster while awaiting trial for the murder of Maria Iannuzzi. Mr. Paradiso provided details of how he committed both murders to two individuals, who then provided significant corroborative evidence in the case that could have only come from no other source than Paradiso. The jury also heard extensive evidence about other suspects at Mr. Paradiso's trial. There is no question in my mind that Paradiso, and he alone, was responsible for the deaths of Maria Iannuzzi and Joan Webster. And at the end of this presentation, I will invite all of you to find out which side you agree with. Put your answers in the comments section below. Okay, these are the two witnesses that he's been talking about. We've mentioned many things about Robert Bond. He is the man that you can see here on the left, and Ralph Anthony Pisa is on the right, also known as Death Row Tony. Robert Bond was the person who has been behind all of these letters, the person who claims that he has info on Paradiso, the person who thinks that he's going to get $50,000 if he is bringing forward any kind of testimony. And we haven't talked much about Ralph Anthony Pisa. He is mentioned, though, in the most recent episode on the murder of Joan Webster, All Sides of the Story, which I would invite you to listen to, and these are all in a playlist. If you would like to follow along with any of these, you can also subscribe to Black Box Online Radio. Okay, now let's look at this slide here. Strangulation or whiskey bottle. Robert Bond did not know the manner of Joan Webster's death in January of 1983. And remember, he mailed the letter on the 10th. He offered the Massachusetts State Police a choice of strangulation or a blow to the head. Bond indicated for the MSP to choose. Like at first he told me he strangled her, Joan Webster. The last thing that he told me was that he did it with a whiskey bottle, so you can pick and choose whatever you fucking want. Okay, I mean, you can see that there. What do you think that means? And I will provide a response to that in the later part of the sections, because this one is, I mean, this is huge. This is absolutely enormous. I mean, is he saying that the authorities need to coach him and tell him what to say? Or is he saying that he has information that he has heard from Leonard Paradiso while he's in jail? I mean, like at first he told me he strangled her. The last thing he told me was that he did it with a whiskey bottle. So, which one is it? I mean, we know that she wasn't murdered on the boat, but, I mean, they could very easily just change the location in their theory to make it work that Paradiso killed her. That's what's important. Whether it's in the taxi or on the boat, what's truly important is who's responsible for the death of Joan Webster, and did they get the right guy? So, on to the next one. Where's Pier 7? Robert Bond did not know where Paradiso moored his boat in January of 1983. And it says, now, if he didn't, that's on you guys. I don't know, and I really don't care where he kept his boat. And then where he worked. Nothing. That is what he told me. That's what he kept. He took her on the boat to show her around, and he asked, did she want a drink? And he says, no, a couple of drinks. She didn't want a drink. This is when he tried to make up with her, and she said, I used the word reject the other day. She said no, I would like to use the words that he used. Eve Carson says that she's interviewed Robert Bond with her private investigator, and that he did not have very strong mental faculties, and they do not believe that he would have concocted any false story on his own without being coached. But you can also hear this angle that they're pushing now, that Leonard Paradiso is working the illegal taxi, right? He picks her up from Logan Airport, Joan Webster that is, drives her to the boat. There's a reason why she gets on the boat that we'll talk about in a second. And then while she's there, he offers her a drink, she rejects him. This is when he sexually assaults her, and they believed that she would have been murdered and dumped her body in the harbor. Alright, okay, that didn't happen, but did Paradiso take her anywhere? Did Paradiso offer her a drink somewhere else? Did he say he was going to get her a drink from a 7-Eleven or something like that? I mean, what do you think happened? Let's find out. Officers interviewing Bond on January 14th, 1983 were Sergeant Carmen Tamaro, Trooper Andrew Palumbo, Corporal Jack O'Rourke, Sergeant Robert Hudson, and John Gillen. Alright, what now? Everything, today we taped? You have knowledge that it's taped. This is Trooper Andrew Palumbo. I'm Sergeant Carmen Tamaro. This is Trooper Jack O'Rourke. And Corporal, I'm sorry. And this is Sergeant Robert Hudson. So they're preparing for their interview with Bond. During the interview with the MSP on January 14th, 1983, Bond told Tamaro and Palumbo there is nothing he can't get out of Paradiso. And what he says very clearly is, there's nothing I can't get out of him. Meaning that he has access to the guy in prison. He can talk to him. Robert Bond is trying to become a snitch, and the motivations for this are very simple. People become snitches for a variety of reasons in jail. They want time off their sentence. They want perhaps some other types of rewards, and in this case, $50,000. Robert Bond's letter alleges that after January 14th, 1983, Bond alleges the same Carmen Tamaro boat story. Okay, so then his story now is that it's in the she was murdered on the boat. I mean, if he was saying anything about this on January 5th of 1983, it certainly was not documented in any form of letter, and it didn't exist at the time. I beat that bitch ass all over my boat. I took my boat way out and I dumped her body. I mean, those things didn't seem to happen. But one point is, though, Joan Webster was killed by blunt force trauma. Does that mean that she had her ass beat? She definitely wasn't buried at sea. And, I mean, what really is going on? I mean, is there any possibility that there could be some truth from Robert Bond? Well, let's look at Tim Burke's book, The Paradiso Files. On page 132, Tim Burke details allegations made by Robert Bond. published in 2008. Burke's account did not reflect Bond's confusion about the location of Paradiso's boat at Pier 7. Bond's account, published by Tim Burke, repeats the boat theory, and Burke repeats the quote from Bond's letter, "I beat that bitch's ass all over my boat." Let's look at some of these highlights here in green. I made her a couple of drinks. I beat her ass all over the boat. She gave up because I hit her with a whiskey bottle. She had a hole in the back of her head from a bottle, and after I hit her, I effed her. I took her body way out and dumped it in. 2 days later, I took my boat back and sank it. Well, we know that he sank the boat in 1981, in the summer of 1981, because of that insurance fraud reason. That is also something that is not true. And in Tim Burke's sworn affidavit to the court on March 2nd, 1984, under pain and penalty of perjury, Tim Burke submitted Robert Bond's written letter and transcript of the 1983 interview with Robert Bond to MSP to Judge Roger Donahue. Donahue presided over the Iannuzzi pretrial and the Marie Iannuzzi trial. Burke submitted the documents on March 2nd, 1984, just prior to the pretrial hearing. Burke claimed he received a letter on or about January 4th, 1983. Well, we've already been through those source documents that say that the letter was mailed on January 10th. So that's another either mistake or maybe it's an intentional fabrication. You be the judge. Judge Roger Donahue sealed Robert Bond's written letter and Marie Iannuzzi's. And excuse me, I'll repeat that. Judge Roger Donahue sealed Robert Bond's written letter and the Bond interview transcript with the MSP in the Marie Iannuzzi pretrial. Burke hid foundational documents for Joan Webster's murder. And this is Judge Donahue sealing the documents on March 3rd, 1984. The Commonwealth offered, without objection, the statement of one Robert Bond, a fellow prisoner of the defendant, and sealed, in essence. This statement contains alleged detailed admissions by the defendant to his involvement in the disappearance of a girl named Webster and the murder and rape of, the name has been redacted. But Leonard Paradiso was also implicated in at least 4 other murders, as well as other crimes such as rape. The alleged crime scene of Joan Webster's murder was the Malafemina, and this was first alleged by Carmen Tomorrow in August of 1982, alleged by Robert Bond on January 14, 1983, during the interview conducted by Tomorrow's subordinate Palumbo, alleged crime scene, and the Marie Iannuzzi search warrant on April 25, 1983, and then Burke published the allegations in 2008. We've been through many of these, except Carmen Tomorrow was the origin of the boat theory. Robert Bond was the person who was providing this info on the 10th, when the letter was mailed, received on the 14th, and interviewed on the 14th, I should say. And then Palumbo kept it going, and Burke still promoted the theory until Joan's remains were discovered on land. Now, here's something big. The Paradiso Files by Tim Burke. Tim Burke presents planted evidence, and if you can't read this in, I'll read this for you. There's nothing else. The trooper raised his eyebrows. You know how we were always wondering how Lenny got Joan onto the Mala with him? I mean, I was even wondering that when I was learning about this stuff. I mean, how on earth would this creepy guy get somebody like Joan Webster, a Harvard graduate student, onto the boat with him? Well, let's keep going. Yeah, I don't think it was voluntary. I think he forced her on the boat somehow. Drew replied with certainty that came from interviewing Joan's family and friends. O'Connell told me that one of the guys that worked at Pier 7 was a skin diver. He said the guy was diving in the spring of 1982 and found a gun right beneath where Paradiso kept his boat moored. He found it submerged between the Erie barge and the pier, and the diver brought in the gun to O'Connell's office to show him and O'Connell, and he had to go back outside and point out where he got the gun. Holy shit, where's the gun now? Glad you asked that question. O'Connell said they threw the gun back in the exact spot where the diver found it, the DA responded. That's weird. Does he remember where? Better than that, O'Connell drew a diagram of the entire area and showed me. I called divers, and they're going to meet us there tomorrow so I can show them where to look. The lawyer sat back, crossed his arms, and smiled at his big friend. Okay, find the gun tomorrow, and maybe I'll change my mind. about calling O'Connell as a witness. That's weird. I mean, ugh. Tim Burke's alleged witness that you just heard there, O'Connell, is John O'Connell, who was a developer who renovated Pier 7 in 1980. He applied and received his HJD federal grant money for the project approved in 1980. O'Connell was under FBI investigation by 1981. FBI videotape O'Connell on November 24th in Jacksonville, Florida, and the videotape was used at a trial. The divers did not find the gun. Well, what would be the point of this gun? I mean, what, Paradiso's gonna murder Joan Webster, sink the boat, and then throw the gun in the water? I mean, this is all just starting to sound a little bit ridiculous. I mean, there'd be so many easier ways to get rid of the gun, and you've heard their story. They don't even believe that Joan Webster was murdered with a gun. At this point, the authorities are saying that he had a gun, he used it to lure her onto the boat, but then he strangled her and struck her with a whiskey bottle. They said that very clearly. Burke took his own diver, Nick Sagisi, on October 20th, 1983, and recovered a fake .357 Magnum while assigned divers still searched the area. Burke introduced this into court. Burke and Palumbo submitted false documents regarding the gun. I mean, no matter what, though, you might even be raising some questions about that there, but this is the dumbest way to ever commit a murder if this thing actually happened, and I don't believe that it did because, as we said, Joan wasn't found at sea, but to lure her onto the boat with a gun, then to sink the boat immediately after the murder, and then throw the gun in the water, I mean, there'd be so many. You would just be asking to get caught at that point, and that didn't happen. I mean, it flat out did not happen. Tim Burke instigated bankruptcy fraud charges against Paradiso. Judge Bruce Selya presided over the case from April 4th to the 9th of 1985. Selya imposed the sentence on May 10th of 1985. Tim Burke and Andrew Palumbo continued to claim Paradiso murdered Joan on his boat, the Malafemina. And this is in 1987. If her remains weren't discovered until 1990, that makes sense to me for their timeline. Tim Burke published the incorrect judge and date for the bankruptcy fraud case. Judge Richard Stearns was appointed to the bench in 1993, 8 years after the case. The false information makes it difficult to find records. Burke hid exculpatory evidence. This one I find to be a little bit more shocking. You see there, though, the name of the judge is Richard Stearns, and this judge was apparently appointed in 1993, appointed by Bill Clinton, of all people, Slick Willie, although the Stearns that Tim Burke has written here is spelled differently. I will just point that out. The other one is spelled with an A. Okay, on to the next slide, because this is the absolute biggest thing that challenges all the theories and raises all the kinds of suspicion. So there's a woman named Karen Wolf who's out walking her dog on April 18th, 1990, and she sees something in the woods that she doesn't recognize. She approaches it, and it turns out to be a human skull, the skull that you're looking at now. And then later on, they began to search the area, and very shortly after, they found the full grave on the 26th of April, 1990. Joan's remains had been buried in the ground, and it's most likely some type of four-legged animal had moved the skull from the burial site to the location where Karen Wolf found it, and then they were able to find out that she had been buried in the ground, the full grave site, on April 26, 1990, and then she's identified on April 30th, 1990, because of dental records. So the human remains found identified a young female. And this is Eve Carson's strongest stance. Joan was not murdered on Paradiso's boat, and she was not dumped in the harbor. Moving on to the next slide here, the Paradiso Files by Tim Burke, and talks about Ralph Anthony Pisa. Remember, we said there are two jailhouse informants. One of them is Robert Bond, the person whom you've heard extensively about, and the second one is Ralph Anthony Pisa. Pisa, known as Death Row Tony, was convicted of the 1969 murder of George Dean. He was sentenced to death, hence the name Death Row Tony. Ralph Anthony Pisa testified during the Iannuzzi pretrial hearing on March 12, 1984. Pisa testified at the Maria Iannuzzi trial on July 15, 1984. Pisa claimed he was on furlough over Christmas 1979. He saw Paradiso at the home of his attorney, John Cavici, on December 24, 1979. The two men stepped outside for a private conversation. Pisa alleged Paradiso confessed to murdering Maria Iannuzzi. About this furlough thing, if I have understood, and it's a little bit weird to some guy like me who wasn't very familiar with it, it's that it's like a temporary release when people can get out of prison for certain days. Like, they don't have to spend the entirety of their sentence behind bars. They can come out for weekends or holidays or something like that. If I'm wrong, I will correct that in the future. But you can see the quotation there. Yeah, he said, this is no joke. I killed the Iannuzzi broad, and I'm in serious trouble. Well, there's your bragging that the ADA was talking about. The Paradiso Files by Tim Burke, page 283. Pisa testified that Paradiso called him at Bay State Prison on December 18, 1981. Pisa alleged Paradiso confessed to murdering Joan Webster. They only found her purse. Pisa did not come forward with the allegations in the Maria Iannuzzi murder or the Joan Webster disappearance until Bond's allegations were in the news. Pisa came forward in February of 1983. No calls, no corroborating evidence, and no contemporaneous evidence. Okay, on to the next one. Death Row Tony walks out as a free man. He gave testimony on July 15, 1984 during the Iannuzzi trial. Pisa changed his plea for his conviction on January 3, 1985. A Middlesex County judge accepted the change of plea. He was sentenced to time served. Middlesex reversed their position based on Pisa's cooperation against Paradiso. You see the function of jailhouse informants. And then there you see this slide here. The two witnesses Burke relied on were for Robert Bond and Tony Pisa, two convicted murderers. Death Row Tony, and there is also his nickname for that crime that we mentioned previously. Robert Bond was not satisfied with the promises made for his cooperation. Well, they did promise him $50,000 that he wasn't going to get. He filed a motion and affidavit on November 15, 1985 during his retrial. Bond named Tim Burke, Andrew Palumbo, and Carmen Tomorrow. And their names are highlighted in one of the rectangles there. The Suffolk County District Attorney's Office has put this out. Tim Burke worked for the Suffolk County DAO. In 1991, Suffolk County was exposed for keeping secret and duplicate files. They hid exculpatory evidence. The Boston Herald broke the story on January 15, 1991. And potential challenges aimed at over hundreds of criminal actions by his prosecutors from 1980 to 1988. Prosecutors conflict over secret sleigh case. Well, that is definitely within the time frame here of the Webster murder, but the Iannuzzi murder would have occurred earlier. However, the trial would have been conducted in the early 1980s. Back to the book, The Paradiso Files by Tim Burke. Burke claimed Joan's gray shoes were in her Lark suitcase, but a Boston Globe article from September 29th of 1983 says something quite different. It says that the shoes were in an uncovered tote bag, yet if they were found in the suitcase, what does that mean? Well, that's a very important one that I will say in the second half, so please stay tuned for that. I repeat, please stay tuned. There's something very telling about the shoes. The shoes were contained in the tote bag and not recovered, okay? So please stay tuned for that, I kid thee not. Now, Burke implicates the police. Informant Robert Bond provided no information about the contents of Joan's Lark suitcase. Tim Burke's representation is false. Law enforcement places items in police evidence. Law enforcement was in possession of items from the tote bag that were not recovered. Tim Burke connects the law enforcement with Joan Webster and or the killer after Joan arrived at Logan Airport on November 28, 1981. And lastly, who murdered Joan Webster? 4 people maintained the Paradiso boat story. Tim Burke, Andrew Palumbo, Carmen Tomorrow, And someone we haven't mentioned yet, George Webster, Joan's own father. And I'm not going to lie to you, I'm not even going to dance around the subject. Eve Carson has put forward a theory, and it's a possibility inside of a theory, that maybe George Webster was someone who could have been responsible for Joan's death. With all of these people here, I mean, Tim Burke is not a suspect in the murder of Joan Webster. I'm going to be 100% clear about that. He is not a suspect. As far as Andrew Palumbo or Carmen Tomorrow or even George Webster, I don't think I've directly heard Eve Carson accuse any of them of Joan's murder. Instead, they say something, or she says something, rather, that they may have had her set up for murder. And this could be because George Webster had a very dark family secret. There had been a felony that had been committed in the Webster family, and Joan had very clear knowledge of it, and she was murdered at the direction of her own father to silence her, not meaning that he delivered the fatal blow, but instead she was set up for murder. Okay, thank you so much for listening to this presentation. And if there's anything that you already are thinking about, put it in the comments section below. Otherwise, please stay tuned for part 2, and we will hear some skeptical challenges as well as my own questions out of curiosity. Everything you heard in this presentation was created by Eve Carson, and I will share some things that I would like to say in response to this in the next segment. Be back after this.
Follow BlackBoxNet88 on Instagram. You are listening to Blackbox Online Radio.
This show is brought to you by TeeSpring. Feel free to check out the merchandise. Almost all sizes and colors are listed.
Blackbox Online Radio.
And remember YouTube Premium. You can download the show, take it on the go, anywhere and anyhow.
Please like and subscribe. Grazie mille.
Okay, hello, and we are back. I said in this segment here that we were going to look at some questions that I had about Eve Carson's presentation and try to find out what exactly is the truth in regards to the murder of Joan Webster as well as the murder of Marie Iannuzzi. Were they committed by the same person, Leonard Paradiso, or is there a police cover-up that is indeed going on? And is there a reason why there are all these discrepancies and these inconsistent statements about the dates and times? My first question for Eve Carson was, you accuse Marie Iannuzzi's current boyfriend, in 1979 that is, her then boyfriend we should say, as being the prime suspect. His name was David Doyle. My simple response to hearing that presentation, how is he implicated by any of this? I mean, yeah, okay, they talk about a John Doe, but you heard very clearly from Tim Burke's own statement in that introductory first half of the presentation that the jury heard about other suspects, and Paradiso was convicted for the murder of Marie Iannuzzi. How exactly is David Doyle implicated? And moving on to the next question, I wanted to know, how do you know that Joan Webster was never strangled if you're talking about Robert Bond obtaining this information from Leonard Paradiso in prison, talking about maybe she was strangled, maybe she was hit with a whiskey bottle? You can choose. How do you know that she was never strangled? As a reader, it sounds like someone is saying that she was both strangled and hit with a whiskey bottle, and if her skeletal remains were not found until 1990, 8.5, nearly 9 years later, then I mean, who's to say that she was not strangled? Who's to say that she wasn't assaulted in some other ways that the medical examiners and pathologists could not determine? And this is my biggest skeptical challenge. And I'm not saying that Eve Carson is wrong, because she has absolutely proven that the boat theory was conducted prematurely, that it was not well thought out, or that it contained numerous inaccuracies. I 100% believe her there. But in regards to this statement that has been put forward by Robert Bond, doesn't it suggest that he is saying that perhaps he obtained this information from Paradiso, that yes, he murdered Joan Webster, she was strangled, and then she was hit with a whiskey bottle? Now, that was just my own observation from the same presentation that I was just reading off from. The next one is, Why is Bond's knowledge of where Paradiso moored his boat relevant? Okay, so this guy, as you said, has some very low-functioning mental skills. Why does it matter if he moored his boat at Pier 7, Pier 6, Pier 362? I mean, isn't it more important that he would have murdered Joan on the boat, which I don't believe happened, of course, absolutely not, but isn't it more important that they were convicting the right guy of murder? And even if this guy, Robert Bond, got the location of the boat wrong, well, who cares? What's the significance of that? And then my final question was about the shoes, and I said there's something big here. Why does it matter where Joan's shoes were, in the suitcase or the tote bag or anywhere? Why is this significant or relevant? And I sent these questions to Eve Carson, and that I was able to get a response from her rather quickly about this. And I do need to be very clear that I think that she's coming from a very good place. I think she genuinely believes what she is saying, and that this isn't coming from any type of ill intention. So let's hear her responses about. First, let's just go right to that thing about the shoes, because that's the one that I ended with. This is an example of Tim Burke lying about what Robert Bond knew. Robert Bond knew nothing about what was in Joan's suitcase. But the bigger problem is Tim Burke places Joan's shoes in police evidence. Joan had no footwear packed in the Lark suitcase. She carried her shoes in the tote bag. The tote bag and contents were never recovered. So how did Joan's shoes end up in police evidence with Joan's other belongings? Law enforcement are the only ones who can put items into police evidence. Whoever put Joan's shoes into police evidence had to have had contact with Joan after she landed at Logan Airport, and or the killer. Okay, so that was the thing about the shoes, first of all. Now, let's look at my first question that I sent in to Eve Carson about what happened to Joan Webster, and really it's going back to 79 and the murder of Maria Iannuzzi, and I was asking her about how exactly is this case leaning toward David Doyle being the murderer of Maria Iannuzzi as opposed to Leonard Paradiso, and her response is, if Tim Burke had seated a John Doe grand jury on March 5th, 1982, as he claimed, he would have gotten an indictment against David Doyle. The testimony was overwhelming. That was not Burke's objective. Keep the timeline in mind. How they started to go after Paradiso. Burke, Palumbo, and Tomorrow entangled the Iannuzzi case with Joan's authorities, targeted Paradiso a full year before they came out with the Bond allegations, the so-called break in Joan's case. Okay, though, and some additional info that I mentioned in an episode called The Murder of Maria Iannuzzi, which you can hear on this channel, and it's in the playlist if you're listening to these things in order. Perhaps you've already heard it, but is that Eve Carson's theory with that one is that David Doyle was Maria Iannuzzi's abusive boyfriend. One night a fight got out of control, he lost it, and he strangled her with her own scarf, and then he called Trooper Andrew Palumbo, who was a friend of David Doyle, and he asked him for help in covering up the murder so he wouldn't go to jail. That is her theory, and I repeat theory, but Andrew Palumbo has already passed away and can no longer provide any comments to these accusations against him. And in January of 1982, Carmen Tomorrow's childhood friend Patty Bono placed an anonymous call to the Saugus Police Department. She implicated Leonard Paradiso for Marie's murder and Joan's disappearance. She provided no evidence of either one. And in a previous episode, I did read off something from Patty Bono that she had posted publicly. Eve Carson has written the book Mommy's a Mole, and there was an article that was out about it, and Patty Bono had written into the comments section saying that she was indeed sexually assaulted by Leonard Paradiso, and this could also be the motivation for her coming forward. As far as providing no evidence, I'm just going to have to leave it at that, but it appears that she was indeed sexually assaulted by Paradiso. And then, if David Doyle had been indicted, that would have broken the connection they were trying to make with Paradiso. Paradiso was named a suspect in Maria Iannuzzi's case. There was no evidence to connect Paradiso to Joan, and I do need to repeat that. Maria Iannuzzi did know Leonard Paradiso. They were out at a function in very close proximity. He saw her the night that she disappeared. They did know each other. I mean, if there's any connection of Joan Webster ever knowing Leonard Paradiso, I've never read about that, so that's another big difference. There was no evidence to connect Paradiso to Joan. The Iannuzzi case was a smokescreen. By naming Leonard Paradiso as the suspect for the 1982 hearing, Burke assured he would not get an indictment against Doyle, and Doyle was not named as the target for the first grand jury, but all of the testimony implicated Doyle for Marie's murder. The target Burke was after was Paradiso, following a meeting with the Websters. George and Eleanor Webster offered reward money. It was never paid out. Tomorrow dangled the Webster reward in front of Robert Bond. This is most definitely an enticement. Burke, Tomorrow, and Palumbo also promised Bond a manslaughter charge for his retrial. They had no authority to make that deal or promise. And you also saw that slide there where Robert Bond says that he didn't get the deal that he wanted for cooperating. Robert Bond was interviewed with the Massachusetts State Police on January 14, 1983, and this was for both murders, Maria Iannuzzi and Joan Webster. I met Bond face to face and attended 2 of his parole hearings. Bond was not a smart man. The PI and lawyer I hired in Boston also confirmed that. The parole labeled Bond as deceptive and extremely dangerous. Marie was strangled. Her manner of death was known. Bond appeared to be getting his stories mixed up. He told the Massachusetts State Police to choose the manner of Joan's death. Tomorrow met with Bond on January 10, 1983 to go over both cases. The letter Bond mailed on January 10, 1983 was written in 2 parts, one about Marie and one about Joan. He mailed them to his wife with an inner envelope addressed to Tim Burke. That is way more scheming than Bond could do on his own. The letter regarding Joan was specific on the manner of death in Pier 7. Now, I mean, you be the judge. Do you agree with Eve that it is impossible for this guy to have concocted the story on his own, and that there's no evidence of anyone ever telling Robert Bond anything? There was no boat at Pier 7. She wasn't taken on any boat. She wasn't murdered on the boat. She wasn't killed by Leonard Paradiso. Do you agree with that? Or do you think that Robert Bond is being truthful in the sense that he is relaying what he heard from Leonard Paradiso, and his odd behavior is more about, I don't care if this is useful to you or not. This is what he told me. But like when they're saying, well, was he strangled or was he hit with a whiskey bottle? You can pick whatever you want. I don't care what you do with this information, but this is what he told me. He said she was strangled and hit with a whiskey bottle. What is the correct interpretation of that? And that's what I'll ask you guys in the comment section. That is the biggest challenge question that I would have for you listeners. Do you believe that Robert Bond's testimony suggests that he has been coached and he is saying a fabricated story, or that words have literally been put into his mouth and into his writing by the authorities because they wanted to blame Paradiso for this murder? As we said, Palumbo has his own agenda. Maybe Burke and Tomorrow have different kinds of an agenda. Or do you think that this guy Bond is being truthful and is saying that, yes, Paradiso said all of these things. If it's not true, I don't care. I'm telling you what he told me. That's my end of the deal. My objective is to tell you what he told me. If it's not useful to you, if it turns out to be false, if you guys get confused, I don't care. Which one is the correct interpretation? Now, Burke claims that Leonard Paradiso confessed to Robert Bond, and Bond provided all kinds of details. For Bond not to know where the boat was at Pier 7 belies Burke's claims. Bond added that if you guys are wrong about Pier 7, that's on you guys, meaning that Massachusetts State Police were the source of Bond's information. Bond did not know critical facts about Joan's murder during the 1983 interview on January 14th. If Burke is to be believed about the witness, he did not know how or where. But at the same time, Bond knows Paradiso's boat was titled in his girlfriend's name or what Joan had packed in her suitcase. Burke's suggestion Paradiso confessed all of this information to Bond does not pass the smell test. In addition, they were already going after Paradiso long before Bond entered the picture. So, that is the last one there, and I would love to hear any responses that you guys have. Big thank you to Eve Carson for writing and creating the entire PowerPoint presentation, as well as responding to my questions that I had after it, and all of these responses that I've been reading off have been written by Eve Carson. And I will turn it over to you. What do you believe happened to Joan Webster? The other suspects in the case are that Michael O'Hare and Gareth Penn, and they're mentioned frequently throughout the other episodes on Joan Webster here on this channel. Anybody can follow along with the playlist about the murder of Joan Webster from 1981. If you like what you hear, you can hit the like button, and if you haven't subscribed yet, you can definitely do so. If you know someone who's into true crime and is curious about these types of cases, feel free to share the channel with them, especially these episodes on the murder of Joan Webster. And I will see you guys on Instagram for the bonus podcast. But don't forget, you can also write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. And there is a link to the Facebook page in the description box here. You can also share any of that stuff with anybody who might find value in it. But I would really love your responses to the challenge question. Do you think that Robert Bond is someone who was coached by the authorities, and in short, they're planting all kinds of fake evidence under the mask of Robert Bond? Or do you think that he actually obtained this info from Leonard Paradiso and simply doesn't care about the consequences? He's like, I'm just telling you what he told me, give me my $50,000. Which version of the events do you think is more appropriate? But I would love to hear any responses that you guys have. Put them down in the comments section below. That will be all for me now. Thank you to Eve Carson one more time. You can find her book, Mommy's a Mole, available on Amazon.com, as well as Tim Burke's book, The Paradiso Files.
This has been a production of Black Box Online Radio, hosted by Ned. Thanks for tuning in. Black Box Online Radio comes to you 3 times a week, covering serial killers and true crime, but any subject is fair game.
So see you on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Until next time.